Okay, you're going to have to forgive me if I start getting furious in this section. But Madison Paige's story is bad. Really bad. Awful. Unbearable. A storyline that would have benefited from being cut completely. Every time she appears, it makes me groan, because every scene she is in exposes not only how awful David Cage is as a writer, but how much of a creep he is when it comes to him and his female characters. It's worse in Beyond Two Souls, but some of the same problems exist here. She is there to be exploited as a sex object, if not in the direct way, then in a really messed up way, and pretty much the only times she isn't are examples of poor planning, bad writing, and game design that makes previous choices utterly meaningless, as the result can negate all the effort put into the trials and the investigation sequences. She's the only character in Heavy Rain with a fucking Wikipedia page, and has been set up as an example of a strong female in gaming, and I kind of wish people and publications would stop doing that, because Debbie Does Dallas has better examples of strong female characters over this woman in David Cage's tripe.
My, Mr. Greenfield, how big you are.
Want an example of her being unnecessary and an element that should be cut? Her first chapter takes place after Sean is kidnapped and reported missing, and Scott's visit to Hassan's shop. So, 2 hours into the game, after firmly establishing Ethan, Jaden, and Scott as central characters, suddenly Madison shows up to explore her nice apartment in her pants, and get a shower in which we see uncensored boobs. Fun fact, Sony were reluctant to have Madison's breasts out not only once, but twice. Obviously, they still made the final cut. David Cage lamented this, saying that it's a shame because Madison has a really great body. Just going to let that quote sink in for a moment. Oh yeah, and she fights off the attackers in her pants, and as she's about to get killed, she wakes up to discover that it's all a dream. So what was the point of the whole scene? To say that Madison's an insomniac? Hey, earth to David Cage. I've had bad dreams about people about to kill me, and I woke up in a shocked state. I'm pretty sure many other people have too. Not only that, but the fact that this scene takes place so far into the game feels jarring, especially when every other character and their unique story is established within the first 30 minutes. Not only that, but you don't see her again until about an hour later. Or 8 chapters later if you want specifics. To fight her insomnia, she checks in at the same motel as Ethan, and she encounters the creepy receptionist.
Hello there, sweetheart. What can I do for you?
She's on her way to her room when you encounter Ethan, having completed his first trial. You escort him to his room and assist him with the injuries sustained. He hops in the shower, and while she wisely tells him to keep talking so that he doesn't go into shock, she can also view him getting undressed and getting in the shower. Okie dokie. So he finishes the shower and she leaves, after learning his name. 30 minutes of playing time later, she leaves her motel room to observe the outside in the ongoing rain. There, she finds Ethan again, and again she heals his wounds, except he passes out, leaving her to watch him sleep for about 3 hours. Oh, and he's shirtless. Getting a really creepy vibe here, even if it's meant to be endearing. There's an option to tell Ethan that her helping him is in relation to fixing her brothers up, and that apparently explains why she chose to fix him up. She asks to help him, but he asks her to leave, and thanks her for her trouble. She leaves. She then shows up at the lizard trial. Like, at the actual building itself after it's been completed, and despite knowing absolutely nothing about Ethan's trials and his connection to the origami killer, she helps him escape the police for no reason at all. This includes carrying Ethan through the streets, through the crowd, and across the train tracks.
What the hell am I doing, helping a fugitive escape? I must be completely out of my mind.
This doesn't make any rational sense. She barely knows the guy, but he comes back to the motel with more injuries for her to treat. Think about this for a second. You just met someone in a motel and have nursed him back to health twice. Would you follow him inside an abandoned building surrounded by police? For all you know, he could be a criminal, and when the news states that Ethan Mars is the prime suspect to the origami killer case, she still helps him! That makes her complicit, since she lets the prime suspect escape the police. And you want to know what her reason is for following Ethan?
I wanted to know.
How did she know where to find him? That trial took several minutes to complete, and she arrived at the building when he started leaving. There's no address to go on, and before anyone says that she might have read the origami lizard to find the address, when Ethan leaves the motel room, the door firmly closes. You ever been to a motel? You can only open those if you have the key. Also, the police must be doing a really bad job if, even when in civilian cars, a random woman knows that it's the police.
The police. They staked out the building where Ethan is.
She just shows up and starts helping him for no logical reason. It's a chapter of convenience that serves to demonstrate that Ethan is, indeed, being hunted by the police. You want to know what happens if Madison wasn't around or didn't exist? The game would continue as usual, and Ethan would get arrested. It would cut to a previously unmentioned chapter that wouldn't exist unless Ethan was taken in, and I highly recommend playing this chapter. Even though it has a lot of problems, like why hasn't Jaden taken the footage from the camera and shown it to his superiors so Blake and Perry would get suspended immediately, or why Jaden would immediately think about releasing Ethan without consulting the FBI, it adds a much needed element to the lack of Jaden's suspicion of Ethan, and would add additional satisfaction to two of the possible endings. Personally, it would have been interesting if he got authorization from the FBI to sneak Ethan out, therefore establishing that not everyone in a position of authority is a complete idiot.
Say something, for God's sake!
Anyway, back to Madison and her hair-pulling plot. Madison admits that every single cop in the country will be wanting his head, and when Ethan says something along the lines of, "I don't know if I'm the killer or not and I might be testing myself," Madison continues to support Ethan. Ethan wisely tells her to leave, and she does. So while Ethan is out killing a drug dealer, Madison uses her journalism connections to somehow find the address of the apartment owner before the police. Considering the DNA and technology evidence prevalent in the apartment, you'd think that a competent police force would wonder who owns the property and who uses the property. In this case, the owner of the property is an Adrian Baker, who was struck off the medical register after doing a stint in prison for drug dealing. The conversation with Madison and Baker is as subtle as a piano falling off a cliff, with the drink Adrian gives you obviously drugged, combined with Madison's need to know who rented the apartment being delivered as if you're a really bad police informant.
I was looking for something around Marble Street.
After some time and getting no answers, Adrian leaves to get Madison some boxes of pills. Here, the story can go in two ways. You can find what you need by seeing a Blue Lagoon card with the name Paco on it, because that means something, or you can get knocked out and encounter this. So, Madison is tied up on a table, and the doctor misses practicing surgery, so he's obviously going to perform some on Madison to make up for what he lost. He nonchalantly says that the property was rented to Paco at the Blue Lagoon, before proceeding to try and stick a cordless drill in her special triangle. David Cage, don't want to sound like a broken record, but you are a creep. Not only does Baker announcing that Paco rented the apartment come off as a way to conveniently get a character from one place to the other with little effort, but the situation borders on fetishistic. Fortunately, someone knocks on the front door at the most convenient moment, although why Baker would interrupt his pleasures for the door is another example of a character or entity being an idiot, which I wouldn't have minded if the entire plot of the story didn't hinge on characters being morons at pivotal points. So of course Madison escapes and successfully kills Baker before it cuts to black. instead of being given the opportunity to explore the house some more and find concrete evidence that isn't just a name scribbled down on a card. What about bank statements or documents showing proof of the rental? Baker doesn't know he's tangled in the origami killer's connection web, so you'd expect that he'd have some official documentation that proves he did business with Paco. This is another case of David Cage not asking questions about his script. Apparently, two twisted killers' lives are related by pure coincidence. Bravo, David. Bravo. So Madison heads to the Blue Lagoon with some new clothes, which she presumably got from her apartment since she didn't bring her clothes to the motel, which I don't mind since it actually avoids the plot hole of why she didn't check up on Ethan in the 10 hours plus since killing a guy, although I have to wonder how she was able to interrogate Paco, go home and get dressed and get back to the motel within half an hour. Funny how she's already gotten over killing a guy and nearly getting penetrated by a cordless drill in the span of half a day. I would have locked myself away and stayed inside for several days and possibly develop a phobia of builders, although she inexplicably has a gun now. Fine? She goes to the club, which is playing arguably the worst club track I have ever heard in my entire life, and subjects herself to being sexualized to catch the attention of the sex-crazed Paco. You want to know how sex-crazed he is? The music he puts on in his office is just women having an orgasm to a backing track.
I'll take that. Just get in the way of the good things, sweet cheeks.
Subtle. You want another example of David Cage being a creep? He actually designed a scenario where Madison can undress down to only her underpants and have the player catch a few moments of exposed breasts before the designers say, screw it, we'll just push them ahead and have her do a sexy dance that doesn't progress until the player grabs the lamp. And here's a reminder of what David Cage said about Madison's body when Sony got iffy about her getting unclothed at the drop of a hat. Now, I'm not against having exposed breasts or sexualization in the media, so long as it serves a purpose and is properly executed. Bayonetta is one of my favourite games of all time, and wears its sexualization on its sleeve, through characterization, camera angles, and some suggestive dialogue. It's consistent direction towards a consistent tone, but what I am getting from this gunpoint stripping sequence is that the purpose is to convey Paco as messed up and sex-obsessed. So why is the camera positioned and edited so that the player can get aroused at this, rather than show Paco's reaction? And if that wasn't enough, you can have Madison make moaning sounds to have a guard leave. If I wasn't so disgusted at the previous scene, I would have been okay with it, but it only serves to demonstrate that David Cage prioritizes Madison as an exploitative object first, crowbarred in love interest second, a get out of jail free card third, as we will soon see, and a well-defined character last. Oh yeah, and she squeezes his testicles to get some information. Paco rented the apartment, but didn't use it or even set foot in it. He gave the keys to a guy called John Shepherd, and with the information she wants, she leaves just as soon as Jaden walks into the club. Funny how Paco somehow managed to unstrap himself from the chair without any help in the span of a minute tops. Confident that Ethan isn't the origami killer, she goes back to the motel to get updated with what he is going through. Q leaning in for the kiss, and being rejected promptly. So here's a question I propose. What reason does she have to lean in for a kiss? Is it to comfort Ethan as he's not only killed someone, but whose son is getting closer to drowning? I'm pretty sure leaning in for a hug would do that sufficiently, not getting undressed and getting funky under the bed sheets. What do these two people know about each other that's attractive? Ethan knows Madison has insomnia and used to fix up her brothers after fights, and Madison knows that his son is currently drowning and Ethan is being subjected to torturous trials she knows very little about. I find his son drowning attractive. I need to make this guy mine. Stat. This is a situation that Madison herself knows is stupid, yet doesn't have a rational explanation for why she leaned into Ethan in the first place, but nevertheless is comfortable in warning Ethan that the police have arrived. Frankly, I'm surprised Carter Blake was unable to recognize her, since he got a pretty good look at her when she arrived at the burnt-out apartment, in addition to the receptionist not paying attention to Madison calling to warn Ethan. Even if you don't warn Ethan, the sequence where Ethan runs away from the police takes place, once again demonstrating how useless Madison is in the bigger picture. Madison arrives at the hospital and wait, what? The police didn't confiscate the motorbike despite it belonging to, according to Blake, an accomplice to the origami killer? She even uses it in her encounter with Baker, in which she disregards parking laws. I would say she makes enough to own a few motorbikes, since she has enough to afford the standard David Cage swanky apartment seen in Fahrenheit and Beyond Two Souls, but let's be honest, his underdeveloped writing is to blame given what I've already shown you in the previous sections. She somehow tracked down Anne Shepard to discover that she's the first person in 10 years to visit her. Somehow, her room is literally down the corridor from the reception, which is strange for an entrance that also serves to admit emergency cases. Her room should be up some floors, since the closest rooms would be for emergency admittance. Even my limited amount of time in hospitals has shown me that you have to go up some stairs and down some corridors just to get to the intensive care unit. Anyways, David Cage doesn't understand how Alzheimer's or dementia works, and as someone who has 2 members of their family suffer from the same illness, it insults me. The disease kills nerves in the brain, and it most certainly doesn't kill fundamental early memories you may have. They tend to go last after more recent memories. Anne Shepard has been in the hospital for 10 years, but she only remembers John. Considering John Shepard is a twin, Anne by all accounts should remember Scott, even if it's a little selective. Objects and people's faces can trigger memories, but it's not a key to unlock a major aspect of your life. We all know why this was written this way, of course. It's so that we don't reveal that Scott is the origami killer, just short of that fact being revealed. But if you're going to use something as sensitive topic as Alzheimer's, you need to thoroughly research it so you don't come across as incompetent or insensitive. It certainly doesn't help that Anne Shepard's voice acting is terrible.
What other son? I have no other son. I never had any children.
Christ, I hate this chapter. So after triggering Anne's memory by bringing in an orchid, an origami figure, and a picture of the twins she has lying around, she tells Madison to come closer so she can tell her the name of the twin. Scott Shelby is the origami killer. Madison is shocked, disturbed, dumbfounded, even though she has never met Scott Shelby or mentioned his name throughout the entire game. For all she knows, it could be just another lead that leads to another. Hell, she doesn't even state how she found Scott Shelby's home. For all we know, the PI facade Shelby has only exists on business cards and his front door. He might not even be listed in the phone book just to be sure he couldn't be found if things go awry. Madison, for no reason whatsoever, is convinced that Scott Shelby is the origami killer. Which he is, no argument there, but David Cage's awful writing fails to explain how she knows him or why she is so shocked that he could be the origami killer.
Not a thing. I can't find a thing. What if Anne gave me the wrong name?
So she successfully breaks into his home and confirms that he was able to kidnap children due to him wearing a police uniform. I'm pretty sure children would be extremely suspicious of a police officer not being in a police car. Or it could be Sean's generation is comprised of morons, considering the lack of common sense Jason had before he died. She finds a secret room which houses the orchids and the tools Scott uses as the origami killer. She inexplicably finds a laptop, successfully guesses his password, and the address Sean is held at is plastered front and center of the screen. Why? Why should the address the boy is held at be put on the screen like that? Does Scott have several properties in which he kills the children? If so, why isn't there a menu to select the cameras and view live? Which I believe he can do considering he watched Ethan cut off a piece of his finger in front of one and take the poison in another. I guess I have to add genius programmer to the things Scott apparently is if he got a complex AI to identify self-mutilation. Why did he have a window containing the exact address, letter to letter, open upon logging in? If he was suddenly searched and had the laptop found, his plan for the father to be the one to rescue the son would be rendered mute. This address isn't found with any effort. Madison literally types in the password and presto, you have the address to Sean.
Got it. Max. The name John gave to his paper dogs when he was a child. What the hell is that?
An address. It's gotta be where Sean Mars is. Hurry, there's no time to lose.
Why does the origami killer have folders called Origami, Orchid, and Sean Mars? Yes, we get it. Scott is the origami killer. Considering this game is rated Peggy 18, I'm pretty sure those playing it would have gotten the message. What files would you store in Orchid anyway?
So you found my little secret?
Madison tries to leave, but is held at gunpoint by Scott, whose attitude is now of a merciless killer, instead of the apologetic killer who says sorry to the children he kills. He forces Madison back into the fridge, that somehow doesn't have an emergency exit button, like almost all industrial doors like this should have, and Madison is forced to find a way out. Yeah, Madison knows his secret, a secret he's so desperate to keep quiet that he doesn't just shoot her! If the police come, just hide the body in the fridge and feign ignorance. If you go by the plot so far, Scott is well respected in the police force, and they are completely inept at investigation procedure, so he'd have nothing to lose if he'd shot her. Oh, and the apartment is on fire. Madison escapes before the apartment explodes by jumping from window to window or hiding in a goddamn fridge, and is given the choice to either ring up Ethan Mars to give him the address, or ring up Norman Jayden to give him the address. Somehow, not only does she have Ethan's phone number, but she somehow has the phone number, name, and knowledge of Jayden's occupation, despite the two never meeting in the game outside of chase sequences when Ethan is presumed to be the killer. Jayden is from out of town, and the closest the two get to a casual encounter is when she walks past him at the Blue Lagoon. If she calls Jayden, she openly admits that he doesn't know her, implying that she somehow knows him. Now, you could argue that she called Jayden at the police station, but here's the thing, she doesn't know Jayden's specific number, and would have to go through reception to get him on the phone, and if you correctly solve the mystery in his final chapter, he immediately leaves to get Sean, so she called his cell phone number that was never given to her. But you know what pisses me off about the chapter? What really infuriates me about Madison's story? It's that she's a get-out-of-jail-free card. She has single-handedly rendered everything we did in Ethan and Jayden's storylines completely worthless. All that investigating, surviving Mad Jack and the Blue Lagoon, killing a guy who has kids, suffering through self-mutilation, endangering his life, and swallowing poison to solve a hangman puzzle. What was left of Ethan's and Jayden's stories that was pretty good to interesting, made completely redundant by one of the worst characters in gaming, going through one of the most poorly thought out and offensive storylines in gaming. And this game is considered one of the best video games of all time. It still is. Somehow. So, yeah. Madison can call either Ethan or Jayden before she herself sets off to the warehouse. Finally, I've gone through each individual's story if everything went fine. The only two people who are guaranteed to survive at this point are Scott and Ethan, which is unfortunate since it shows that David Cage doesn't have the courage to give death real consequences. Jayden's situation with Corda I can forgive since the beating was prolonged enough just to make me a little nervous, but failing the electricity trial and the drug dealer trial just ends with Ethan leaving the premises. Same with Scott when he turns into Fat John Wick. Still, I have got through this trash to the point where I can look at the final chapter and the endings for what they are.